Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For 30 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues related to peace, social and economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. This month, we will learn about the criminal justice system and especially about the death penalty from the firsthand experience of someone who has lived his entire life right here in Washington State. Dawood Al-Malik was completely innocent of the crimes for which he was prosecuted and imprisoned for more than 49 years, including some years on death row. Dawood went to prison in 1966 at the age of 19 and was released on parole in February 2015. Despite the horrible injustices he experienced, Dawood survived with a warm sweetness about him and a healthy appreciation for the full humanity of himself and other people. I was delighted to develop a friendship with Dawood, and I'm happy he's with us now to share his firsthand experience and his insights. Welcome. I am glad that you are here.
Thank you, Glenn.
This will be fun, despite the heavy topic. It's always fun to talk with you, and I've enjoyed that a number of times. Let's start the conversation, Dawood, with some information about the crimes for which you were unjustly prosecuted and imprisoned. What happened that night in 1966?
May 27th, 1966, I was arrested for initially one count of murder and 3 robberies. Approximately 30 days later, the charges were amended, and I was charged with another count of murder and a robbery. And I went to trial, and 4 months later in September of '66, and the jury found me guilty and imposed the death penalty.
Yeah. You knew that you were innocent, and did this, I mean, how could you get a rude awakening of being caught by surprise, knowing that you're innocent, and this happened? How does reality dawn upon you during that time?
The reality, in my case, Glenn, was the fact that I knew that I was innocent, and at the same time, didn't have the knowledge or the wisdom or understanding of what it really was that I was facing or how to approach the situation that I was facing. So I listened to my attorneys and followed their instruction.
Yeah, a 19-year-old is really not well equipped to deal with that kind of a horrendous
Not at all.
Reality. My understanding is that the guy who probably committed it later acknowledged your innocence?
Absolutely. He acknowledged my innocence, and at the same time, the individual whom he committed the crime with, he came forward with that information.
Some people watching the program have some knowledge about how the death penalty has operated in this country, and some might not know.
Right.
But your crime was from 1966, and the sentencing happened a bit after that. In 1972, the United States Supreme Court, in the case of Furman versus Georgia, threw out all death sentences nationwide, as you well know, because that moved you from death row into the general prison population, but you're still there.
Right.
And the reasoning from the Supreme Court in 1972 was that there is so much arbitrariness and just downright screwiness of how the death penalty was being sentenced, largely resulting in racial bias and all kinds of other inconsistencies, that the Supreme Court said, this is just not workable, we're going to get rid of all those death sentences. States started coming back in 1976 with their own revised laws,
Right.
supposedly to tighten up the system. Of course, the same problems have occurred now during these succeeding decades, same amount of racism, screwiness, arbitrariness, inconsistencies. It's just an unworkable system.
And unworkable and unjust,
Yeah.
and as you just said, arbitrary and capricious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of other elements involved, I believe, especially in my particular case. Evidence that was suppressed and withheld,
Yeah.
prosecutorial misconduct.
And we'll talk about these in
Okay.
just a moment. I mean, that's our next.
Okay.
That's where we're going next with this. So a lot of people. You're not certainly not the only one
Not
who.
the only- no way.
There are patterns that happened nationwide a lot, and you're one.
Well, it's
Example
historically,
here.
this is what, if you're poor, and primarily if you're black, I mean, you don't have the attorneys, the monies to get the right attorneys to defend you, and that's the way the system operates.
Yeah. Are there examples in your particular case of things that the police did that were unjust regarding your case? And we have only just a couple of minutes for this
Right.
question.
Well,
So don't get me started on.
There were several things. There was evidence, as I said earlier, that was suppressed and withheld. Eyewitnesses who seen the murder itself wasn't called to testify. And I didn't get this information until 1998. So it was there from
3 decades later.
3 decades later,
Jeez.
this information surfaced. And the people wasn't called to testify, and they gave their report to the police as to what they observed and what they had seen, and they was never called to testify, nor was I aware of them, like I said, until 32 years later that they existed.
Yeah. If we had a justice system that was really committed to justice and truth, they would pursue this kind of stuff. It seems to me, not knowing your case firsthand, but in other cases I know about, it satisfies the police's need as long as they got somebody that they can refer to the prosecutor, and there's not a strong motive for them to go out and actually find the witnesses or the evidence or whatever.
That was what I was hoping for when I filed my petition to have the DNA tested. And currently that petition is pending in the Ninth Circuit Court, but the evidence have come up, it's disappeared, it's no longer in existence. And this is where my problem is they want me to produce it.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible for me to do that.
Yeah. At this point, once they've convicted and sentenced an innocent person, then the burden of proof shifts on you to prove that you're innocent, whereas the system is supposed to say you're innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely.
They mistakenly proved you guilty, and now the shoe's on the other foot, and how can you do that when they've lost the DNA evidence?
It's practically, I don't say it's impossible, but I'm still hopeful that the judicial system or the justice process will take its course and look at the evidence that's there. And there's cases already established that says in the event that evidence come up lost or suppressed or withheld, that the accused is to be allowed a new trial. But thus far, that haven't happened yet.
Yeah. And again, my starting point, just from my own ethics, my own values, is the system should be seeking the truth, not just a quick decision.
Absolutely, and that's supposed to be the premises of the court system, is to protect the innocent as well as convict the guilty. But you got to. But when the system is working in such a way, whereas justice is the last thing, you're dealing with emotions. You're just dealing with a system that's we got two bodies, and that's good enough. Let's do what we need to do.
Right, and the prosecutor wants to win, and that's going to be that's our next question.
At all costs.
At all costs. So I know I've read up on cases all over the country where prosecutors will suppress evidence or do various kinds of things because they want to win. And in your case, are there things that the prosecutor did or did not do that you find unjust?
Well, the prosecutor in my case, as I said earlier, suppressed the evidence. And Brady versus Maryland, U.S. Supreme Court ruled, this was in 1963, 3 years before my arrest, that those activities are unconstitutional and illegal to withhold and suppress evidence that shows a person innocent. And as I said, the prosecutor and the police department, Seattle Police Department, chose to withhold that evidence, and I'm still fighting and battling that aspect of it.
Yeah, half a century later.
Half a century later, Glenn. And it's frustrating, but I'm determined to establish that fact that I am innocent.
Right. And I'm glad that you mentioned Seattle, because people need to know this is a Washington State case.
Right.
You and I are both lifelong Washingtonians.
Yes, sir.
And Washingtonians tend to be smug about how much smarter and better our state is than all those other stupid states that make a lot of mistakes. But this gross injustice happened right here in our own state of Washington.
Absolutely.
And there's lots of other injustices here as well. So this is not something where we can just point fingers at
well, it's not so
other states.
unusual. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
It's not so unusual.
Yeah. Are there any things that the judge or other parts of the system did unjustly in your case? I know of cases where judges and other parts of the system have done unjust things elsewhere.
Well, like I said, there was witnesses who observed the crime happening, and they was never notified or testified to come to court and give their testimony to that fact. And like I say, 32 years later, am I gaining that information through the Freedom of Information Act from the FBI and Seattle Police Department. This is when I became aware of those facts. I was always aware that I was innocent, but the proof was always there. And, of course, as you said earlier, I went through the bitterness and all of those gamuts of emotions. But at the same time, I tried to maintain a perspective of finding a way to prove my innocence and get my release.
And we'll talk about this further in a few minutes. I want to make sure that the viewers are attentive to some of the realities that pertain in your case and so many other cases.
So many
One
others.
is increasingly, I think the American people understand that racial bias infects many parts of our criminal justice system, just like racial bias affects many other parts of American society, but the death penalty is especially affected. And as I had mentioned earlier when we talked about the 1972 Supreme Court decision, the racial bias resulting from all that arbitrariness in sentencing was part of what caused the Supreme Court to throw out death sentences as violating 18th and 14th Amendments. And unfortunately, the remedies that the states wrote into their new laws from 1976 on resulted in the same kinds of problems. I've studied this extensively for decades that I've been working against the death penalty, and you've experienced this, of course, firsthand. When we were preparing for this TV interview, you mentioned to me that when you were growing up in Seattle, you were clearly not welcome in some nice white areas. I mean, so I mean, this was back in the 60s.
Back in the 60s.
But that reality is part of what leads us into the problems that occurred to you.
But man, I come from a very large family in Seattle. There was 8 boys and 5 girls. So we had a very large family. And family was known to the police department. And at the same time, me being a part of the family structure at a very young age, the police used to take me, pick me up for no reason at all, take me across the floating bridge to Bellevue or Mercer Island, and make me get out the car and walk back to the Central District. You know, I don't know if that practice is still occurring today, but that was one of the things that they used to do with a lot of, with me in particular, you know. And of course, get out the car and you're in an area that you know you don't belong or don't live.
Yeah.
If anything happened to you, okay, it wouldn't be no big thing.
Right.
Because first of all, what are you doing there?
Yeah.
Why are you there? Okay, and I think that was one of the reasons that they took me over there and dropped me off was for something to happen. But fortunately, by the grace of Almighty God, nothing happened. I just walked back to the Central District and walked home. But those are some of the things that occurred to me as a young kid. Of course, racism exists, and it, you know, it's what other way to describe it other than the fact that it's totally institutionalized to the core in every aspect of our society. So,
a couple of years ago, I did a lot of research about racial bias in Washington State's death penalty specifically, and I want to just summarize a couple of these main points. It's true in Washington State as well as elsewhere.
Yes, sir.
As of May 26, 2015, when I did this research, there were 9 people on Washington State's death row. 5 were white, 4 were black. That's really quite disproportional to the population, and that does not reflect the murder rates as to who's committing murders either. Every juror that convicted and sentenced Washington State's black defendants was white.
Exactly.
From 1926 to 1949, the state of Washington executed 7 black persons, and that's the 16% of the persons executed during those years. And back then, from 1926 to 1949, you know there were not 16% of our population that were black.
3%, about maybe 3 to 4% of the African American population in Washington.
And that would also, of course, vastly exceed the rate of who's committing the murders during those years as well. I want to summarize something that a professor at the University of Washington did, some powerful information. She found that in Washington State, when the facts of cases are similar, if you look at a case with a white defendant or a case with a black defendant, jurors are 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence if the defendant is black instead of white, even after you control for the variables of how serious was the crime or what was going on and stuff like that. So I want to just summarize out of 285 cases that Catherine Beckett studied in which defendants were convicted of aggravated murder, which is the kind of murder for which people get the death penalty, as you know. The cases were analyzed for factors that might influence sentencing, including number of victims and prior criminal record and so forth. And Professor Beckett's research discovered that jurors in Washington State are 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a black defendant than a white defendant in a similar case. And there's just all kinds of evidence showing in Washington State, as elsewhere, if the victim of the murder is white, whoever is convicted is more likely to get a sentence to death than if the victim was black or Native American or whatever. And there's bias. People need to realize there's bias in how juries are chosen in a whole bunch of different ways. If it comes from the list of registered voters, who's more likely to be a voter? You know, if you have a felony record, you're likely to be prevented from voting. So that would exclude some kinds of people based on class and race. And if when potential jurors are prevented from serving on the jury because they have particular kinds of experiences that might influence their judgment in some way, the kinds of people who would get excluded are more likely to be poor, minority, and so forth. So there's just all kinds of systems built in, and you end up with a lot of all-white juries.
Well, the fact that the jurors, in my case, it was an all-white jury that convicted me, but anyone that had any scruples against capital punishment, they were not allowed to sit on the jury. And that is why the U.S. Supreme Court in Foreman v. Georgia stated that capital punishment was unconstitutional in its present form because of that fact. You was automatically a stacked jury of death penalty people with plate, and those who opposed capital punishment wasn't allowed to sit on the jury. And that's why they said it was unconstitutional. One of the reasons they said it was unconstitutional.
And yet we still have that same practice of these so-called death-qualified juries. That still is what happens. And African Americans, much more so than white folks, are more likely to oppose the death penalty and be excluded from juries for that reason. And also, there's a lot more of this sort of thing. One of the things that, of course, your case is about is innocence, and people don't realize, I think, how severe the problems are of reasons for that. One of the reasons why people who oppose the death penalty do oppose it is the risk of executing people who are innocent. And even people, research has shown, including research that we did in Thurston County here of registered voters in 1999, showed that even people who support the death penalty are more troubled by the risk of executing an innocent person than any of the other reasons. I want to just mention something about innocence. Somebody a few years back studied 86 cases of innocent people who were convicted and sent to death row. And what were the reasons why these innocent people were convicted and sentenced to death row? You'll see on this bar chart, the tall bar here shows that out of those 86 cases, 45 were eyewitness error. Juries tend to believe eyewitnesses. They think, oh, that's got to be reliable. And actually, eyewitness error is the biggest reason why innocent people are convicted and sentenced to death. They don't know that research has shown how unreliable eyewitness is. And in particular, if you have somebody of one race who's an eyewitness and they're identifying somebody of a different race, doesn't matter which race is the witness, which race is the defendant, they're more likely to misidentify if you're identifying somebody across races. I want to show some photos here. If you can look at the top row, there are three guys here. The guy in the middle committed a lot of rapes and robberies. When the police brought in lineups, victims identified the guy on the left and the guy on the right, and you'll see how similar they look to each other. The guy in the middle did it, but look how similar the guy on the left and the guy on the right are. Those guys were chosen in the police lineups by witnesses, right? Honest mistakes. If you look at the bottom, when the police have an artist do a composite drawing, you know, what did this person's eyes look like? What did their nose look like? Did they have a mustache or not, or whatever? There are two photos at the bottom of innocent guys, each one holding the composite drawing that the police had generated, and those composite drawings look a heck of a lot like the innocent guy who the police, well, the fellow here in the white T-shirt, he was detained, not arrested or tried, but this fellow actually went on trial, and fortunately, the jury recognized that he was innocent. But these are cases where composite drawings from eyewitnesses to the police artist led to mistaken identification. This is just really, really common. When we were talking on the phone, you mentioned the Central Park Five, this case from 1989.
Right.
Tell us just a bit about that.
Well, that was a case where 5 young men was accused of raping a person that was jogging in the park, to my recollection of the reported facts. And it came out that they was totally innocent of the crime.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, they served time, and he served a lot of time.
Yeah,
for,
it was over 20 years.
Yes,
I looked.
yes.
I did a little bit of research on that. It was over 20 years they served.
And it's appalling in the sense that our recently elected president still believes that they're guilty.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And like you said earlier too about the identification. In most instances, you know, and it's a common saying, a common thing, most all black people look alike.
Well, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're talking about identification and everything in that regard, excuse me, you know, how reliable are the identification?
Yeah. And I should have mentioned when I showed this thing, while eyewitness error was the biggest reason, the tall bar on the other side is other. There's a bunch of other reasons, but this bar right here showed that the second biggest reason for innocent people being convicted and sentenced to death was government misconduct.
Yes.
And that includes things like hiding or lying about evidence that would show innocence.
Yeah.
That's what happened in your case.
Exactly.
It happens very often, and that's the second biggest thing. So even if you have an eyewitness that makes an honest mistake, there are a lot of cases where the police know, or the prosecutor knows, somebody's innocent, but they have pressure on themselves to convict somebody.
And that pressure, you know, get the facts, deal with the facts, and not just deal from an emotional basis.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Not just deal from an emotional basis, you know. And I understand that, you know, you have to try to apprehend the person who did the crime. And the DNA, like in my case, really will show who the true culprit was. So why would they want to suppress that and withhold that?
Yeah. Well, the system, once they've made a mistake, and help yourself to some water if that will help,
Yes, I think
the system does not like to admit that it makes a mistake. And the prosecutors don't want to make admit they made a mistake. The police, the judges, the newspapers that campaign for somebody's guilt, you know.
Right.
Nobody wants to admit that they made a mistake. I've read about people who have retired after having served as prosecutors or judges, and they admit only after they've retired that there were cases in which they had suppressed evidence or lied or did some kind of fudging because they really wanted to win more than they wanted to get the truth. But these guys can't admit that until after they retire.
After they
some
retire,
of them.
absolutely.
And there are a lot of other cases. In the year 2000, the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation brought to town another innocent survivor of death row, Sonia Jacobs. It was a Florida case. She was 16 years in prison, including, I think, 5 or more years on death row. Turned out that the person who had actually committed the murder was the main witness who identified Sonia and her husband as killers.
Right.
So this guy, as so often happens, you know, is the real killer, but he identifies somebody else. The police and the prosecutor go after them. Before the truth came out, Sonia Jacobs' husband had been executed in Florida's electric chair, and his head caught fire. This was a well-known case at that time, but we do have her speaking engagement from April of 2000 on the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation's website, so people can watch it. She's a very sweet person, as you are. Terribly unjust treatment, you know. But if you visit the death penalty part of www.olympiafor, near the top of that page is the link to watch her speaking engagement. We also have it on the TV programs part of www.olympiafor. Scroll all the way down through the recent years and look at the year 2000.
Right.
We've got that in there. That was our May 2000 TV program. But she has a very compelling story, and it was a full hour with her talking and nobody interrupting like I'm interrupting you all the time.
No, you're not interrupting.
But it's really a compelling story to watch.
I would take the opportunity to do that.
You know, you and I have some mutual friends, and when I've told people that I've met you and we're going to do this TV show, everybody says how sweet you are, and that's what I've discovered in these conversations that you and I have had since we met last summer. When we were preparing for this program, for this interview here, one of the things that you mentioned was a concern for how these crimes have affected the family members of the victims.
Right.
And there's just more evidence of your sweetness. How have those family members been, the family members of the victims, how have they been affected?
Well, and currently I'm not allowed to enter King County because of the victims' attitude, because of their expressed concern.
Well, it comes down through the legal system that keeps you out of that county.
But that wasn't in place when I was convicted. It's not even a part of my sentence. But it's something that's being enforced to prevent me from going to King County. And I have empathy and sympathy for the victim family. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. But at the same time, I have empathy and sympathy about my family, how they've suffered, what they suffered also.
And they still live in King County.
And they still live in King County, which I'm unable to see on a frequent basis.
Yeah.
And some are very old and can't travel, you know. So, and at the same time, I would like to be able to go and visit my parents' grave, you know.
Yeah.
Those things. And being deprived of that or being denied of that right to do that, and I feel that it is a right, is asinine and totally unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But as I said, I understand. I've had sisters and nieces and nephew who's brutally murdered, you know, and I understand how people feel. Totally understand how they feel. But at the same time, my approach and understanding forgiveness and, you know, truly forgiving the person who have committed the crime.
Yeah.
You can't go around continue to have that hatred and that bitterness in your heart. You got to learn how to forgive, and I thank God for moving me through that process and that understanding, seriously.
Yeah.
I know, as you say, 19 years old, when I was placed in prison, I didn't have hardly any. I was 8th grade dropout. You know, no education and no excuses or nothing, but this was the situation.
Yeah.
And here I am sitting in the court, facing the death penalty, can't hardly read or write, and no understanding of what's really going on. No, really couldn't do hardly anything to help myself.
Well, it's clear that since the age of 19, you've grown a lot, and I know that you got your the GED. You went ahead and got a bachelor's degree. You're very knowledgeable, smart, well-read, and savvy and mature. It's amazing how you've been able to come through all of this. And you when you were in prison, you did things you started some nonprofit groups and did some other things to help the prisoners who were worse off than you.
Right. Well, that was my environment. That was my community. And in any community that you're a part of, you try to do the best you can to make it a better community. And in spite of the oppression and repression and suppression, you move forward. You still try to maintain a sense of humanity about yourself. And at that time, prison reform was in the making in the state of Washington, and there was opportunity to take advantage of that.
Yeah,
that's what I attempted to do.
Right, people nowadays don't remember, after all this tough on crime baloney that's been so brutal, people don't remember that there was a little window of time when the prison system was really serious about rehabilitation. They did things so that folks like yourself could actually get some education, have some
vocational
autonomy.
Skills. Exactly.
You know, a bit of respect. It's just amazing. And that the door is slammed on that. I think that's going to open back up because there's people.
Well, I certainly hope so.
People working on that now.
Good.
Again, but you really were able to emerge after that half century with amazingly positive mental health, and I'm curious how you were able to transition, experience that, and come out of this no more damaged than.
Well, there's been a lot of people that have assisted me along the way, and they know who they are, and I, for instance, like the warden,
Bob Ray.
Yeah. And people who have been there, and mentors like Gordy Graham, and Johnny Harris, a lot of other individuals who helped me along the way in the community, and Larry Gossett. There's just been numerous people, Suzanne Kelly, and man, so many of them. And I feel remiss in not mentioning them all, but at the same time, they know that I truly and honestly appreciate them being there and giving me advice and helping me along the way.
Well, and you seem to have done that for other folks as well while you were in there.
Pass it on. Each one teach one.
That's what you're doing.
Each one teach
one.
But
I think it's interesting that you and the warden at the penitentiary in Walla Walla had become friends and had a mutual appreciation.
Well, he was a strong inspiration, seriously. He inspired me. He inspired me in one of the main reasons to continue to fight my case. After he learned the facts and everything, told me to pursue it, and inspired me and encouraged me to pursue it. And don't give up. And it's unusual for prisoners to talk about a warden.
Yeah.
But facts are facts. This man treated me in a very humane and a very respectful way, and I appreciated him for being a heck of a good mentor to me.
It's probably also unusual for a warden to have a lifer as a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something. Your father was a Baptist minister at one of the churches in Seattle,
Yes, sir.
and you've had a faith journey that has taken you several routes along the way. Is there something you could say about your faith journey, or is there something about how that has sustained you during this time?
Islam, I converted to Islam in 1976. And that was truly have kept me grounded, and realizing too that the Almighty Creator is not going to put a greater burden on you than you can bear, and understanding and knowing that and believing that, and through prayer, patience, perseverance, persistence, just tried to do my best. And in any situation you're in, you put your best foot forward. There's been a lot of, people that, like I said earlier, that have inspired me and motivated me to keep on striving.
You kept getting turned down for parole, and for those who don't remember how parole works, that we haven't had this for a long time, but your case was old enough that you're still covered by that old law. Right. The idea with parole is if somebody has been serving a sentence and they really don't need to be in prison, it would be possible to let them out even without the state saying, okay, now you're innocent, but to say, there's just no need to keep you here longer, you're safe on the outside, and then there's a monitoring with a parole officer. But you kept getting turned down. Finally, you were granted parole, and you came out of prison in February 2015. The state still claims that you're guilty.
Right.
They haven't sought the truth yet, but they finally recognize that you should be able to live somewhat of a normal life with some basic human dignity, even though accountable to a parole officer. The outside world has changed so much in the half century since 1966. What have you experienced in transitioning from living in prison to living in the outside world, the outside modern world?
I'm still learning, still making that transition, and looking at it. When I left in 1966, the most modern color TV just had came out, and one of the most modern, you might say, technological tool at that particular time was the transition radio. So now we're dealing with all kind of different apparatuses and whatnot that I'm trying to learn how to operate because you have to learn in order to adjust and move in this society now. So I'm still in the process of learning, and want to learn and will learn. It's a big adjustment, but I'm up for the challenge.
All right, well, good for you.
Very up for the challenge, yes, sir.
Part of what we want to do with this TV interview is, besides get to know you as a person, as a survivor of the system who is innocent even though the system doesn't know that yet, but we want to also show some more about the death penalty as an oppressive system. And we're conducting this interview in January of 2017. It'll air on TCTV in Thurston County in February, and it'll be on Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation website beyond that. But as of now, 19 states and Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, do not have the death penalty. Since 2007, the past 10 years now, 7 states have abolished the death penalty, and then there are 4 states, including Washington, that even though their death penalty law still exists, they're not executing anybody.
Right.
So the governor of Washington, Jay Inslee, in February of 2014, imposed a moratorium. He says, as long as I'm governor, I won't allow any executions to occur. New cases can come along, cases can continue working through the system, but he just won't sign the execution orders. Since the 1970s, Washington State has executed 5 persons, but 20 persons have had their death sentences overturned.
Exactly.
Our system is just full of mistakes.
Flaws.
Just full of flaws, right.
Yes, sir.
And that's a terrible error rate. 5 executions, but 20 death sentences overturned. And Washington State is not alone in this. I mean, the states have all kinds of stuff. We have a number of states who've had to release large numbers of people from death row because they were just flat out innocent. And when the governor of Washington issued his moratorium in February 2014, he said his announcement called for a public conversation about the death penalty.
Absolutely.
And when you have a politician who says, I'm going to take this action, and now we need to have a public conversation, what that means is the politician is saying, I'm going as far as I can go because it's not politically safe for me to move further, to actually call for abolishing the law.
Right.
You know, and so that means that he won't move further ahead until public opinion has moved far enough ahead that we can drag the politicians along behind the public opinion. So that's our challenge, is to move public opinion so that the public will say, the death penalty is wrong, it's stupid, it's just immoral, unjust in so many ways, we got to move that. And that's been my agenda for decades. And so I'm hoping the people watching the program, having gotten to know you a bit, will say, we just got to get rid of that law. This does not do us any good. Can you comment on this kind of an approach?
I would say this. When Washington State did not impose the death penalty on Gary Ridgway.
Mm-hmm. The guy that killed like 50 people or
48, 50
whatever.
people, right?
Yeah.
Allegedly. That to me said that capital punishment in the state of Washington truly had been, should be abolished. And where's the equity in the sense that here you want to convict a person for one murder, and here's a person that committed 48 and is not subject to capital punishment. Where's the just? And also, when you're looking at this, people who are subject to the death penalty, it's only reserved for those individuals who are poor, don't have the means to, is implemented unfairly in every way. It's only a certain segment of our society is subject to that type of punishment. And where's the just there? Where's the justice there? That's, to me, saying that it should be abolished totally.
Right.
Completely. And being allegedly the most civilized nation in the world, and we're still practicing that barbaric practice. You know, it don't say too much about our society.
Right. You know, a lot of people don't realize that the rest of the world has gone way past this.
Absolutely.
The United States is one of very few nations that executes a lot of people. The worst executor is China. Saudi Arabia is a big one, and the other nations that do a lot of executions, along with the United States, are the worst human rights abusers in the world. And sometimes I wear a button that says "Civilized nations abolish the death penalty," but Rwanda, after all that massive killing they had, they abolished the death penalty. And as you've mentioned when we were preparing for the program, South Africa got rid of it. They needed to get rid of the racism. Part of that is get rid of the death penalty.
Absolutely.
And all of virtually all of Latin America, European Union, nations all around the world, but the United States is in there with China and Saudi Arabia and a few other rogue nations in doing this. And so people need to connect with the nonprofit groups that we'll be listing in a moment. We're getting a bit tight on time, but I do want to mention that In just a moment, I'll be listing a number of nonprofit organizations and information sources that people can do, and then we'll list those with the closing credits, and we'll also post that list of these organizational resources and information sources on the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation's website. People can visit www.olympiafor.org, and then if you click the TV programs link, there'll be a link for February 2017 for people to watch this program, and next to that link will be a PDF document that I will write up based on the things that we've said during the interview, including the list of these organizations and information sources, so people can follow up, learn, and get organized and get active with these advocacy groups that are working to abolish the death penalty. So that will be a good resource. I want to mention some progress that we actually have been making nationwide. I mentioned already that a number of states have abolished the death penalty recently. And after all these tough on crime laws were passed a few decades ago, people started to figure out that these long, harsh prison sentences don't solve the problem. They waste tax dollars, they waste people's lives. And now you've got people in both political parties, politicians, all the way up to the level of Congress, who are saying we got to ease back on those sentences. About criminal justice system altogether. But after the 1976, the number of death sentences imposed in the United States grew until they peaked in 1996 at 315 new death sentences imposed in 1996. Since then, the trend has been downward. By 2012, it was down to 80 death sentences, and in 2016, it was down to 29 new death sentences, down from a peak of 315. So there's a lot of reasons why fewer death sentences are being imposed. Also, the number of executions has declined. It peaked at 98 executions in 1999, and the number has been dropping, and now that's down to 20 in 2016 for a number of reasons. Public opinion surveys showed support for death penalty peaked in 1994, and it's been declining. Now it's down to around half, depending on which survey you look at. So I just find it interesting that the trend is headed in the direction that we want to head it in, but we got to ramp up the pressure. Yeah, we need more people to work on this. I hope that our viewers will follow up by learning more about connecting with the nonprofit organizations and so forth. I want to mention some resources here, and we'll post these in the closing credits, and as I mentioned a moment ago, we'll post these on the website, the PDF for the TV program for February 17 at the death penalty part of olympiafor.org. So the Olympia FOR invites people to connect with our Committee for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. We share information by email, we meet regularly, we organize activities to inform the public and to interact with government officials. You can call 360-491-9093. You can send an email to deathpenalty@olympiafor.org. We have posted a huge amount of fascinating information, including a lot of things that you just won't see anywhere else on the death penalty part of our website, www.olympiafor.org. Statewide, we have the Washington Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, which I've been a member of since the late 1980s. They have an office in Seattle with off and on minimal staffing. Phone is 206-622-8952. The website is www.abolishdeathpenalty.org. Nationwide, the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty is very good. They're at ncadp.org. And I really like the savvy organizing done by Equal Justice USA, and their website is www.ejusa.org. The best, most amazing source of information is the Death Penalty Information Center. Their website is www.deathpenaltyinfo.org. So you can go there, click issues, and then click innocence, or click racial bias, or international, or all kinds of stuff. They're just an amazing source of information. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I hope people will watch the Olympia FOR's TV interview, or it was actually a speaking engagement that we videotaped and turned into our program for May of 2000, when Sonia Jacobs spoke in Olympia about her experience as an innocent death row survivor from Florida. And you can visit the www.olympiafr.org, click death penalty, and it's near the top of that page. It's also on the TV programs page if you scroll down to the year 2000. I want to just see if you have closing thoughts. We're just going to wrap things up. I'd like to hear anything else from you that maybe we haven't yet touched on, or anything to reinforce.
Well, I would just like to say this, Glenn. Change is inevitable. Nothing stays the same. And there's a lot of people in prison that I know that I left behind. Even the ones that are guilty have changed. And when is enough enough? Life without the possibility of parole. I think that's another unfair sentence, because everybody deserves another chance. Everybody deserves another chance. And when you say that a person don't deserve another chance, I mean, I don't know no other way to put it. You know, you're taking on a God's complex.
Well, the whole theological notion of grace says what you're saying.
Exactly.
Is that you don't condemn somebody forever.
No, you don't.
You got to have some grace.
Exactly. And again, I go back to that forgiveness. You know, we have to, as a society, we have to, truly have that compassion for forgiveness.
Great. Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversations we've had during the times our friendship here since, it's been about a half a year or so now.
Yeah, since the summer.
And it's fun to get you on the program
and
let the people get to know you a bit, and your insights, your experience, your wisdom, and see if we can get more people going to turn this unjust system around.
Well, I know I'm willing and to give my all in all to help that change take place.
Okay.
That's for sure.
So if people want to see about speaking engagements or something, they can contact us, and I can get a hold of you and see if we can make some more good things happen.
Okay, beautiful.
I appreciate that.
All right.
The people who watch this TV interview series have humane values. We care about truth and human rights. Our criminal justice system often ignores truth and human rights. When we hear individuals such as Dawood al-Malik share their firsthand experiences, this is more powerful and more memorable than hearing the statistics that have accumulated. Experiences such as Dawood's can move us to learn more and get active in solving the problems. Our humane values compel us to do that. When we do this together, we build people power from the grassroots up. That's what we need at the local, national, and global levels. You can get information about a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. 360-491-9093, www.olympiafor.org. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it, and the world needs what you have to offer. Thank you so much for watching.